Here we go. So this sheet is to look at, and we'll write on the data table on the back problems, but you're putting the rest of it in your journal, and I'll walk you through the first problems because these are the first of 8 that we're doing. This is the first 4. So in your journal, if you would put the date in the upper right corner, and so why would I have you doing that on every page? First of all, you should date all of your notes you take, just like you put your name and date on every paper you're doing. If I were Quincy and I'm halfway through this, we're in the second quarter, and if this were my journal, right here, and she was gone on some cross country or something, she missed the whole day, a couple times that week. She may have missed some instruction that we're note taking or something. So she would be asking someone to copy their notes. And she would be able to say to them, I was gone on this date and this date. Is there any way I can get your notes? If she's going to ask Sophie for those notes, Sophie's got them dated up in the corner. It's easier for you to find the dates by looking through the corners than it is to open every single page and turn it and find it. Okay, so that's my first piece of advice, as getting your date up in that corner. Okay. Our heading for today's assignment is scientific method. So you're going to write scientific method. The subheading is SpongeBob Part 1, which is the heading on your paper. If you don't have room to the right for enough space to write a few notes here, you can start right here with about 4 lines, and you need to put a star on the right side of it, on the edge of your paper, so you can find that star easily. Because you're gonna go back to this in just a minute. You're gonna know why. So on your second line, write the word independent. And that, if you can't see that, it's on your handout. So get in the habit of spelling it correctly. And above that, in parentheses, I want you to write the word change. This is the variable that we're changing. Okay, so when we have an experiment that's set up well, we are only changing one variable at a time so that we can keep good control on our experiment, right? Didn't you learn that last year in Mr. Pettit's class? You don't throw in a bunch of changes all in one step, because you won't know which of the changes were the reason for the outcome. So your independent variable is the change. Skip a line and write dependent. And that's what's being measured. What is the measure? I mean, what are we looking for as the change, as we're affected by the change? So these little clues in parentheses help you remember which one's which. Because even adults get them confused who are actually in the practice of the science. Like, there's a lot of adults that don't even know these words. But since we're in the science, we're doing this work, and it's really, until you get a lot of it done, you tend to forget which one is which. So we have these little notes to go back to when we're going over this handout. So, taking a look at the first story, Mr. Krabs wants to make Bikini Bottom a better place, a nicer place to live. He has created a new sauce he thinks will reduce the production of body gas associated with eating Krabby Patties from the Krusty Krab. Sounds like bombs from Marks In and Out. I'm just kidding. So, he recruits 100 customers with a history of gas problems. He has 50 of them, Group A, eat Krabby Patties with the new sauce. The other 50, Group B, eat Krabby Patties with sauce that looks just like the new sauce, but is really just a mixture of mayo and food coloring. Both groups were told that they were getting the sauce that would reduce gas production. After 2 hours of eating Krabby Patties, 30 customers in the first group, Group A, reported having fewer gas problems. The Group B customers, 8 of them, were reported having fewer gas problems. So as you look at those questions, they're not numbered, but we're going to number them in our journal. Okay? So number 1, which people are in the control group? Is it the group that's getting the new sauce or the group that thinks they're getting the new sauce but nothing's changed? So the word control, what does that mean? To change or to keep? If I'm trying to control something, am I trying to keep it the same or change it?
Keep it.
Keep it. So which of these two groups is the keep or the control? Group B, because they're not the trial group. So you're going to write in your notes, number 1, the control. You do not have to write complete sentences on this step until we get to the conclusion. Because in 8th grade science, we are really working on your writing skills and your conclusions for right now. Did you do a lot of writing for your experiments last year? Yeah. Would you say that you were writing about the scientific method? What do you think? Today in Mr. Pettit's class, we went outside to collect macroinvertebrates from the river. It was a sunny day, partly cloudy and 80 degrees. Is that how you wrote your journal? That was called a write-up, right? And you were embedding the scientific method in a journal kind of way, in what was called a write-up. That's called expository writing. So in 8th, you're really good at it, because did you do a lot of them? How many of you had at least a page of journal? How many of you had a page in the back? How many of you had more than that? Well, you're going to see that we're going to get a lot less than that in the amount of stuff we're writing, but we're going to probably take the same amount of time to get it written. So the flip side of it is we're not like regurgitating what our brain is remembering we did and writing that in a journal. We're actually going to do a little more thinking first before we start writing. And it's not a lot of writing. It's very specific. Okay? So number 2, what is the independent variable? So the independent variable is the change that's being implemented in this experiment. What's the change? Raise your hand if you know that. Is it Augie? Yeah.
Half the people are getting a new sauce.
New sauce. Does everybody agree? Yeah. So the independent is the new sauce. Number 3, dependent is what are we measuring to see if that sauce worked. In the results, what were they showing or trying to show?
That people not noose here, sauce, like actually like faked it.
And what were we looking for? What is it?
That the new sauce reduces gas problems.
Yeah, so there's a reduction in gas problems or less gas problems, however you want to say that. So the dependent thing we're measuring is kind of ambiguous in this case, but it's still reporting it. So less gas or reduction in gas production. And do we have numbers to go with that? Yeah, it's in the number of people reporting that less gas. So we have some numerical data that's the measure part of determining less gas production. Does that make sense? So the 4th one, and the 5th one together. So I want you to put 4 and 5 together, because this is really what determines your conclusion. And you're going to state a claim. Did you have to state any claims last year? There are 2 classes, probably Mr. Pettit. If blah, 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 then this will happen. Is that a claim? That's a hypothesis. But your claim is what did happen. So what happened here? And did you have to state claims in Miss Pierce's class? So like, what are you claiming you think the theme of this story is? Something like that, right? So you had to say, the stories seem to show, you know, whatever theme. And here's the evidence that I believe why I'm saying that. Did she have you writing like that or talking like that? So you were actually practicing claims and evidence in your English class. In your science class, we do claims and evidence with reasoning based on the results of an experiment. So this year in science, you're doing more of a formal lab report, and a lot of this to start with, we're focusing just on the conclusion. We already have the knowledge of what we're doing and how we set it up. We're focusing on the data we collect and what happened. So you're doing a lot more thinking about what the data is telling you, and you're writing a really good paragraph. What makes a good paragraph? How long does a paragraph have to be? 5 to 7 sentences. In this case, we're going to start with 3 to 5. Okay? So, how many of you believe that this new sauce worked? Sophie, do you want to make a claim?
Yes. I believe the sauce worked because over 50% of the people that had it said that it worked.
Good. So not only did she say she thinks it works, she backed it up with some data, the evidence piece. We're going to get, because we have really specific data, we're going to use that specific number. So you're on the right track. So the first thing you do is decide whether you think that the experiment worked or not. And most of you are saying it did. I don't have anyone that said it didn't. So make that your first claim. I'm going to write that right here so we can see it. The new sauce did what? Seemed to work? Was successful? What do you want to say?
Was successful.
Was successful. At reducing gas because gas, period. There's your sentence. Now we gotta put the evidence in. Okay, so the evidence is 30 customers reported 30 out of what?
50.
Okay, so I'm gonna write this up here and you guys decide how you want to put it in there. I just said 30 out of 50. Is there another way to say the same data? Yes.
60%.
60%. Is there another way to say it? Can you say 30 out of 50 without all that?
Not with 3/5.
3/5. Or 30 over 50. Isn't that ratio saying 30 out of 50 the same way? So you can say it this way, this way, this way, or this way. Be honest, how many were thinking 60%? About half or less. Is that okay? Yes. If you weren't thinking it, is it wrong? No. Because 30 out of 50 is the same data. It depends on how your math brain is looking at it. You just can't change the numbers. So it's okay to say 30 out of 50. And it's okay to say 60%. It's the same thing because that's what our data tells us. So you guys pick which one you want to start with. right here. So you're coming up with what your data is saying. And that's one of these ways to say it. So I like this percentages. So I'm going to say 60% of what group? Group A reported less gas. However, did we have Group B report less gas? How many? 8 out of 50. Can I say 8 out of 50? What's that percentage? 16%. Can I say 16% if I don't like saying 8 out of 50? It's up to you. It's the same thing. Put it on paper. Do you have it, Kate? Get it written down. Okay. However, Group B had 8 out of 50, or 16%, also report less gas. Why is it that the non-new sauce group had less gas? What do you think? They were told they were getting the sauce that would reduce gas production. Both groups were told that. What's that group called?
I forgot what it's called.
What does it mean?
It means, like in medicine, when they're testing out the new medicine, they tell half the people that they're getting any medicine when they're not. And sometimes some of those people get better.
Sometimes they report the same outcome, even though they're not getting the actual new stuff, right?
Because it's like
Because they think they got the new stuff, they're actually thinking they feel better. That's how you say that. However, Group B had 8 out of 10 or 16% also report less gas. This was because they thought they were getting the new sauce, and so they thought they were feeling better. You need to write that down. Because that's the reasoning part of why the group that didn't get the new sauce is reporting something you would think they shouldn't. So you guys are writing that part down. I'm not writing all of this for you. Who wants to tell me what you wrote? Quincy, what'd you say?
What?
What'd you say?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Caden, what are you saying? Put your pencil on your paper. Gotta write it. Why did this B group report some less gas? They were told they got the new sauce, so therefore they thought their gas was being reduced. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. What is that effect called? The way Augie described this definition of it is called something. You've probably heard it at least maybe twice. Once in 6th grade when you went over the same handout. And last year maybe once or twice from Mr. Pettit. The placebo effect. So your last statement is this is called the placebo effect. Because Group B was told they were given the new sauce, some of them reported feeling less gas, which is called the placebo effect. is do you think that it's important to have this is what we call a double-blind study? And let's say we're developing a new medication for some sort of symptoms of something. And so this is really a process that happens in the medical field. Some company develops a new drug that's supposed to work for something, and then it gets to the point where they're actually going into human trials, and they need a big enough group where the whole group thinks they're getting the medication, the new one to try, but some of them don't get it. They get a placebo, like a sugar pill. It's not a sugar pill, but it looks like the medication. And so the entire group is going through this period of trying it, and then they're tracking the symptoms or the results. If this showed, for example, nearly 60% of the B group also felt less gas, would you tell me that the experiment was working, the new sauce? Would you say the new sauce was working if the experimental group had the same amount show less gas? No. That's your control group. Right? Your control group is the group who doesn't get a change, and if they report similar things than the change, there's a problem with your study, right? So then you have to go back and figure out a different plan. That's called an iteration. As you change your experiment and revise it, because now you have a new question or a situation, and then you set up at the next part of your trial or your experiment, you're doing iterations to get to the answer to the question. Okay? All right, so does everybody get an idea how to fill this out? Now, even though I'm talking through this a lot, does it take a lot more time to think about it before you write? This is the top part, is you have about 7 sentences on this paper that's going to take some time to think about getting it written down. When you're journaling or doing a write-up, you just start writing what your brain was remembering. And so it takes a lot more time to think before you write, so it's about really in the end same amount of time. So skip a line and you're going to write slimatosis. So slimatosis is about SpongeBob noticing that Gary is suffering from slime on his shell and a smelly shell. So he has a friend that tells him that rubbing seaweed works to get rid of it. And another friend, Sandy, says that drinking kelp is the way to get rid of this slimatosis. So he decides to have Gary rub himself with seaweed for a week and drink Dr. Kelp. And after 1 week's time, it was gone. So that's your experiment. What do we call, so under slimatosis heading, number 1, what's the initial observation? Your first sentence tells you what it is. What's the one word that tells me what is an observation? Notices. So if I notice something, and am I observing something? So when it asks you what's the initial observation, that isn't going to say, the initial observation was blah, blah, blah. In 8th grade, you're doing inference making. So you need to recognize words that mean other things. So the word notice means to observe. So when they say, what's the initial observation, you can pick that out in the first sentence. So what do you think the first observation, what is the observation? What do you think it is? What is he noticing?
That Gary's suffering from slimatosis.
Gary has slimatosis. Okay, good. What is the independent variable? In your notes, you wrote a note about what an independent variable is, Cade. What's an independent variable? Is it the change or the measure? I erased it. It should be on your notes. Check it. Did you write it? Okay, that's why we have it in our notes. You need to write in your notes, independent equals change. Do you guys see why I had you do that? Because now, like, 20 minutes later, you're forgetting which one's which. Tonight, when you finish your homework, you're going to forget which one's which. So you have to put those in your notes. Dependent means what? Quincy? Measure. So this one is the change. What is getting changed? What are we implementing? One or two things? Two things. What are those two over here on this side? Hannah, what's the two things that we're doing for this problem?
The seaweed and Dr. Kelp.
Yep. Seaweed and Dr. Kelp. Excellent. Okay, number 3. What's a dependent? What are we measuring? This is an observation. It's a qualitative observation. What are we measuring? We're going to know it worked if...
Gary's slime goes away.
Yeah. So the dependent is no more what? No more slimatosis. This is the difference between qualitative data and quantitative data. What's the base word of qualitative? If I take the suffix off of qualitative, what's the word I have? Quincy.
Quality.
Quality. If I'm describing qualities of things, I'm using my senses. In this case, the eyes and the nose, because we're smelling it and seeing the, feeling the slime. So it's our touch too. What's the base word of quantitative? Quantity. Quantity means what?
How much?
Numbers in how much, right? So that's the difference when you break down those two big words and how to know what they are. Okay, number 4. What should his conclusion be? Does it appear that it worked? So it appears, let's not say it. I hate it's to start a sentence. What's the it?
Gary.
Seaweed and Dr. Kelp appear to work. What's the problem with this? We don't know which one. Here's what we also don't know. We don't know, honestly, is it both that work? Or is this seaweed actually works, but we're drinking Dr. Kelp, and it wasn't really doing anything? This was just helping, but we think now we have to use both. Or vice versa. What else is missing in this experiment?
How long was it for?
Yep. What else? And more importantly, what we had in the last one that we don't in this one. What do you think? It starts with the C. I heard it. The control group, right? Is there a control group? There needs to be 4 Garys, or there needs to be Gary getting this 4 times. Once is to not give him any implementation and let the week go by and see if he gets over it. Much like a virus when you have a cold. You think you have something else, you go to the doctor, they go, it's just a cold, it's going to have to run its course. Okay? So we don't know that, because we don't have that info. We also would have to have Gary have it again and give him the Dr. Kelp the independent variable, the change that we're doing, right? For a week and see what happens. We'd have to have him get it again, implement the seaweed, so that we could see if that was it. And we already know the results of both. So you'd have to run 4 trials because we're missing the control for sure. So it does appear to work. However, you need to write the rest of this. The discussion we just had was, this isn't a good experiment because what was missing? Write that in your conclusion. What should be done if you had to do it again? There should be 4 trials or 4 people with this condition. Okay, are you writing it? Write what you can. Is however a transition word? This experiment is missing a control. The no Dr. Kelp or seaweed would be a control for 1 week. Second one, Dr. Kelp only. Third, seaweed only. And fourth, we know those results. Only then will we know what we can do for this. That's about 5 to 7 sentences.